So let's move over to, I think, Jordan next, right? Okay, let's go over there because I've seen Jordan as being existing during the time of Antichrist because of Daniel chapter 11. It's very clear Ammon is mentioned there along with, I believe, another area of Jordan. So Jordan exists. However, you put Jordan in this category. So let me ask you about that. So Jordan, the way you see it.
Okay, so let's start with, can you read Jeremiah 49, 1 through 6?
So Jeremiah 49 says this, against the Ammonites. Thus says the Lord, has Israel no sons? Has he no heir? Why then does Milcom inherit Gad, and his people dwell in its cities? Therefore, behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, that I will cause to be heard an alarm of war in Rabbah of the Ammonites. It shall be a desolate mound, and her villages shall be burned with fire. Then Israel shall take possession of his inheritance, says the Lord. Wail, O Heshbon, for Ai is plundered. Cry, you daughters of Rabbah. Gird yourselves with sackcloth. Lament and run to and fro by the walls, for Milcom shall go into captivity with its priests and its princes together. Why do you boast in the valleys, your flowing valley, O backsliding daughter, who trusted in her treasures, saying, who will come against me? Behold, I will bring fear upon you, says the Lord of hosts. From all those who are around you, you shall be driven out, every one headlong, and no one will gather those who wander off. But afterward, I will bring back the captives of the people of Ammon, says the Lord.
Okay. So while I start to talk about that, why don't you turn to Zephaniah 2? That'll be our next reading. Jeremiah asked a rhetorical question, has Israel no sons, no heirs, etc. Then why are you trespassing Milcom, which is the god at that time of Jeremiah? Now, of course, now that would probably refer to Allah in our day and age. But why are you trespassing on the territory of Gad? Because that territory was promised to Gad. Okay, well, if Hitler would have killed all the Jews, and there was no Jews returning to Israel, especially from the tribe of Gad or whatever, that's a great question. Go ahead and inherit that territory. He's not coming back. He's genocide of the Jews. But wait, Hitler wasn't successful. And the Jews are back in the land, and they're trespassing on Gad's territory is what he's saying there. Now, Rabbah, the Ammonites, is roughly Ammon, Jordan. That's pretty much the proximity of Ammon, Jordan. It says it's going to be a desolate mound. Sounds very much like what happens with Damascus. Okay, and that Israel will take possession of its inheritance. Well, that's territory of Gad. They were going to expand territorially into that. Now, they wouldn't just do that, some peacekeeping political deal. They'd win a war. It becomes a desolate mound. They move in and take over territory, which they feel is theirs anyways because it's part of the Abrahamic covenant, the chosen land in Genesis 15:18, from the river of Egypt, probably the Nile, all the way to the river Euphrates, just in Genesis 15:18, which courses through modern-day Iraq and Syria. But what's interesting is it says, fear will come from all around you in that prophecy. And look what we've been talking about. Missiles from Syria, potentially, missiles from Hezbollah, Iranian missiles flying over Jordanian territory to get into Israel, Hamas. And Jordan, a lot of people think, well, this prophecy, which I think is part of Psalm 83, means Psalm 83 can't happen because we got a peace treaty with Jordan. Well, that's a very fragile peace treaty, and you don't find it in this verse or the one you're about to read. You do find war. You do find Jordan becoming a war zone and a dispersion going on. And it says in the end times, I will bring back the captives that were dispersed out back and restore their fortunes. Another good news for Jordan, just like it was good news for Iran and the Elam prophecy. But before that good news happens, they got this desolation going on. So why don't you read Zephaniah 2, 8 and 9. It talks about other details of that.
8 and 9. It's also interesting, by the way, you mentioned Gad not being eliminated. Hitler wasn't able to get rid of all the Jews. Gad is also one of the 12,000 that are mentioned in Revelation chapter 7 of the 12 tribes of Israel.
That's right.
That's verses 8 and 9, you said?
Zephaniah 2, 8 and 9.
Verse 8 says, I have heard the reproach of Moab and the insults of the people of Ammon, with which they have reproached my people and made arrogant threats against their borders. Therefore, as I live, says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, surely Moab shall be like Sodom, and the people of Ammon like Gomorrah, overrun with the weeds and salt pits and a perpetual desolation. The residue of my people shall plunder them, and the remnant of my people shall possess them.
Okay,
Wow.
so we're talking about another camera angle, in my estimation, of Jeremiah 49, verse 2, the desolate mountain scenario. It's going to be desolated. And it says, the residue of my people will plunder them. That would be the IDF in my estimation. And my people will possess them, meaning they'll expand territorially, which is another part of things that could happen. Israel could start expanding territorially. It becomes a greater, safer country after it starts taking out some of those enemies. Not listed in Ezekiel 38, by the way. Amman, Jordan is not listed in Ezekiel 38, nor was Damascus. So how do we know, Bill, that these prophecies could happen before the tribulation? Okay, good question, right? You were just going to ask me that. I can tell you were just going to ask me that.
I was going to ask you that because I think it's intriguing to all these. I mean, you brought in a lot of different prophecies. This is a lot of work that you've done. And I know, because I know how much work it is for me to do what I do regarding the Bible and Bible prophecy and teaching. So that's a lot of work, a lot of different camera angles. I love how you put that. And again, people are wondering, okay, this is interesting, but... And there you go.
Right. So why would this happen? It has not happened yet, and you can check the records. This Jordan still exists, Amman, Jordan. It was never reduced to the desolation it was talked about in Zephaniah 2 or Jeremiah 49, verse 2. And who does it? It's the Israeli Defense Forces. So here's how we start thinking. Anything involving the Israeli Defense Forces fighting out their enemy, taking out Damascus, perhaps involved in Iran, they're doing that before the tribulation, and here's why we could pretty much compartmentalize that. In the first half of the tribulation, they feel that they're living in peace. They've confirmed, a covenant has been confirmed with them as one of the signatories, and they believe they've just accomplished peace. It's a pseudo-peace because it gets broken in the midpoint of the trib. But they're not fighting off the Arabs at that point in time. They're living in this, what they feel is a state of peace. There's so much in a state of peace at this point, they can't even stop the Antichrist from going into the midpoint of the tribulation and desecrating the temple and going into the Holy of Holies. So it doesn't show them in a war mode at that point. And then you get into the second half of the tribulation. Jesus even said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel in Matthew 24, verses 15, flee immediately. In other words, don't go fight a bunch of Arabs on the way. And where does he tell them to flee? He tells them to flee to the mountains area, which we would say goes to Petra, Jordan. Okay. Now, right now, that's under Jordanian sovereignty. It would not. That's terrible advice. Don't, because even though they've got a peace treaty with Jordan, a lot of Jordanians don't like Israelis. So you can't be fleeing over. You can't be fleeing over into Petra, Jordan right now unless you have possession of Petra, Jordan. And I believe when they take over, and that's in Edom.
That's a very interesting point that you just made.
Yeah. So they're gonna take possession, and then they're gonna feel like they're at rest with their enemies over there. And so when they have to flee, they're gonna flee, and they're gonna flee to a place where they can safely flee. And Ezekiel 25 verses 14 because that area is ancient Edom. Okay, so you have Ammon, Jordan, Ammon is north. Moab, which you read in Zephaniah 2, is central Jordan, and Edom would be southern Jordan. Okay, so that's an ancient Edom. While I'm talking, go to Ezekiel 25 verses 12 through 14, because now we're going to get into the destruction of southern Jordan, where they take over Petra, and then we're going to talk about Saudi Arabia, which is another prophecy we need to look at. There's a couple of things. Saudi Arabia is involved in 4 prophecies in the end times.
Yeah. So what verses in Ezekiel 25?
Yeah, let's start with 12 through 14, I think it is.
Thus says the Lord God, because of what Edom did against the house of Judah by taking vengeance, and has greatly offended the avenging itself on them. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, I will also stretch out my hand against Edom, cut off man and beast from it, and make it desolate from Teman. Dedan will fall by the sword. I will lay my vengeance on Edom by the hand of my people Israel, that they may do in Edom according to my anger and according to my fury, and they shall know my vengeance, says the Lord God. That's pretty straightforward.
Okay, so what he's talking about right there is he's going to, by the hand of my people Israel, he's going to exercise his vengeance and fury on Edom, and there's going to be that destruction going on there. So we already talked about Ammon in Jeremiah 49 and Zephaniah 2 and Moab. Now we're talking about this, but the interesting thing here, he's talking about Dedan also. Now we know Dedan is in Ezekiel 38 verses 13, representing Saudi Arabia. So we see Dedan is also in this prophecy too, and I'm going to tell you that they show up in 4 prophecies. And the last one is Ezekiel 38:13, where by that time they're protesting.
All they can do is protest.
Yes, yeah. So in Jeremiah 49, I'll just briefly say this real quick before I qualify what Tom just read. Jeremiah 49, it talks about this calamity of Esau that's going to come. And Esau is the father of the Edomites. We find that in Genesis 36. And we just read a prophecy in Ezekiel about Edom, okay, southern Jordan. So the calamity of Esau is going to come on his ethnic representation through time, which is at this point we have a lot of them in the Palestinians today. Okay, just so they have a face on that. But he talks about, and the calamity of Esau comes, he tells Dedan, he warns them, flee back to the depths. You know, don't get involved. Okay? And so they apparently don't listen. And then when this happens in Edom, in Ezekiel 25, Dedan shall fall by the sword. Okay? Mm-hmm. So in other words, well, it didn't wipe out Saudi Arabia, but they didn't listen to what they're supposed to do in Jeremiah 49. They fall by the sword. Now, the Saudi Arabia is also listed as the Ishmaelites in Psalm 83, verses 6 through 8, with that 10-member confederacy in Psalm 83. So I think that's their involvement there. I think Saudi Arabia, and by the way, they just came out, and you know, we hate to timestamp this thing because this is going to be a timeless video, right, Tom? But Saudi Arabia they're buddying up with Israel. The old saying in Israel and the Middle East is, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And it's my enemy Israel of my enemy Iran. My enemy Israel is not my friend. But there's another saying that we got going here with what's going on with Saudi Arabia right now. And the enemy of my friend is my enemy. And the friend is the Palestinians. Mm-hmm. They recently said we will not normalize ties with Israel until they have a Palestinian state together with Israel. That just came out in the press. Mm-hmm. So even though they need Israel's weaponry to take out Iran and to go and fight them together against that nuclear threat, they're at this point still holding on to the Palestinian card. Very interesting.
Yeah, it's real interesting.